As well as causing a grave humanitarian crisis, the war in Ukraine has had far-reaching impacts on the global energy system, disrupting supply and demand patterns and fracturing long-standing trading relationships. It has pushed up energy prices for many consumers and businesses around the world, hurting households, industries, and entire economies, mostly severely in the developing world where people can least afford it. The questions raised today are: how can the world overcome the energy crisis without threatening the derail efforts to tackle the world's critical challenge of reducing global greenhouse emissions quickly enough to avoid catastrophic climate change? And is the war going to get worse amidst nuclear threats? This is All 24 News special coverage. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Zaporizhzhia. And before we bring in our guest, here is the latest. A Russian rocket destroyed a 5-story apartment block in the southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia, killing a woman and leaving other residents trapped under the rubble.
A military strike hit Zaporizhzhia city center in southeast Ukraine again and destroyed residential buildings on Thursday. Local authorities reported 2 dead in the aftermath.
At night, when people were sleeping, the enemy carried out a rocket attack against residential houses. 2 upper floors are destroyed. The enemy is terrorizing a peaceful population. We will hold on and we will win.
To address the problem of Russian soldiers' presence at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, President of Ukraine received IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi on Thursday in Kiev. At a news conference, Grossi said that the UN nuclear watchdog considered the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to be a Ukrainian facility.
We are here in a war. We want this war to stop. The war should stop immediately. And of course, the position of the IAEA is that this facility is a Ukrainian facility.
For his part, President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that the Ukrainian forces have recaptured more than 500 square kilometers of territory and dozens of settlements in the southern Kherson region alone.
Since October 1st, and in the Kherson region alone, more than 500 square kilometers of territory and dozens of settlements have been liberated and stabilized from the Russian pseudo-referendum.
In turn, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that he is working to stabilize and develop the situation in what he called Russian territories.
We're working on the assumption that the situation will stabilize so that we can quietly develop those territories and help you to develop the country in general.
Zaporizhzhia is one of the 4 Ukrainian regions annexed by Russia last week. Kyiv says it will never accept the illegal seizure of its territory by force, and it has been condemned by Ukraine's allies.
All right, let's bring in our guest. Joining me live from Ukraine via Skype is Mr. Ivan Vershtuk, editor at the New Voice of Ukraine from Kiev, as well as from Beijing, China, is Zhen Shenghui, journalist of CGTN National or China National Television. And from Paris is Abdul Noor Toumi, Maghreb affairs expert and journalist at Orsam, Turkey. Gentlemen, madam, thank you indeed for agreeing to be with us. The first question goes for you, madam. First, what seems to be a naive question, perhaps, but who, according to you, do you think is winning the war in Ukraine? If Russia loses the war, Russia is going to be different. But if Russia wins, Europe is going to be different. How do you read it yourself?
I would say that in this war, nobody is actually gaining from this war, except perhaps for the United States, gaining a lot from giving weapons to Ukraine and by getting lots of benefits from this war, what's happening now in Ukraine and in Russia. And I would also want to talk about this, is that we are really looking closely what's happening now in Ukraine and in Russia, what will be happening, we find that this is a very trouble issue both for Russia's economical development, for its national stability, and it's also a very challenging part for Europe, because Europe has actually engaged, or it has just implied, but without actually wanting to be inside. So this we can actually talking about also the role that NATO are actually playing in this issue, in this international issue. We can find that today European countries are suffering from the cut of the gas, the cut of petrol. They are suffering from the energy crisis, especially for this coming winter. So how European people are going to enduring this cold winter, that will be a very large issue for this coming days, and which also triggers inflation all around the world. So we can see that nobody is actually winning from this crisis except for the US. And what will be going on with Europe, and what will be going on with the NATO situation? We have seen that Ukraine has already asked help and asked to join the NATO more pressingly these days. So I don't know if there will be more actions from the Russia's part to come and to calm down the situation. But for all the indicators that we have for now, we can see that no positive symptoms, no positive indicators are appearing for now.
Very nice. And let's get the Ukrainian perspective. Mr. Ivan Vershtuk, it seems as though the military momentum is on the Ukrainian side. So here, what's the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons to guarantee the win for Russia? And do you think that the consequences of resorting to such solution are understood in Russia?
I think that after we had this huge advance in the south, the next big thing is going to come when the Ukrainian army will be on their border with Crimea. It's obvious that Kremlin and Vladimir Putin, they want to keep Crimea as Russian territory. So when the Ukrainian army steps closer to that region, Putin is going to warn Ukraine that if you're going to go further, there is high risk that we'll have to use the nuclear weapons. And Russia at this point has two nuclear options. First is blowing up the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia, and the second one is deploying the classical nuclear bomb that could be launched from the Russian territory. And we've heard the reports from British intelligence that this nuclear facility that is launching nuclear weapons in Russia, it's been brought closer to Ukraine's border in case it needs to be deployed. But to make things sound a little bit more optimistic, because nuclear war would be a disaster for all of us. The Ukrainian air defense system is quite well prepared, and there is high probability if by any chance the nuclear rocket is going to be launched from Russia, it's going to be intercepted by Ukraine's air defense system. Well, too bad Israel didn't want to provide Ukraine with this legendary Iron Dome system that they've been proud of globally. They said we're not going to give those weapons to Ukraine, but nevertheless, we have lots of artillery of various types able to conduct surface-to-air missions, meaning striking all kind of targets in the skies, and that gives us advantage, because here in Ukraine we do understand we do not want the World War III. We want to win our war and regain our territories. We don't want to confuse the international community to create any additional tensions that are not needed, and we are not happy about the energy crisis, inflation, not any things of that type. But we need to, to defend our nation. We need to liberate our land, and we need to take care of the people on the occupied territories as they expect in the Ukrainian army to bring them freedom. So we have to make these complicated decisions. And the Ukrainian leadership had this special meeting of the Security Council to understand what needs to be done to get prepared for the possible nuclear scenario. This is a huge, huge challenge for us. But on the other hand, I believe that the Ukrainian army's advance, both in the south, closer to Crimea, as well as in the east, will be continuing. That's
Very
like
nice.
the the line of the Ukrainian government.
Very nice. And let me here bring in to the conversation Mr. Abdelnour Toumi. Mr. Abdelnour Toumi, what do we get here? Is there a perception, a general perception that flirting with Ukraine with regards to NATO helped draw Russia into its next Vietnam? And why do you think the West is always trying to link the issue to Putin only as a person, as though the problems of Russia as a country with the West is Putin? How do you read this narrative, Mr. Abdelnour Toumi?
Good afternoon, sir, and thank you for having me. Actually, I'm having a little bit of technical problem.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, but I'm getting some weird noises in the back. But anyway, actually, the war or the ongoing war now has entered into a new phase. And I'm afraid to say this, actually we are entering into kind of an Orwellian scenario. And as we all know, as George Orwell put it, the greatest way to end a war is to lose it. Now the question, does President Putin want to end this war on this way? I don't know. So I thought
Yes, we are actually witnessing a technical problem, apparently.
Well, that
To me, it seems that we are having a technical problem with your connection. Perhaps I might redirect the question to journalist Zheng. Have you heard the question, or do you want me to ask it again?
Please, I think he responded a little bit, but I didn't hear him very well.
Yes, it seems that he's having connection problem. We're going to have to call him again.
Yeah, and so it's like, what do you think that the West is trying to link the issue to Putin as though the problems to the problems to Russia as a country with the West is Putin? If I were understood this question, it's more about the role that Russia is actually playing now in the region, right?
Indeed.
Okay, so actually in Chinese part and in Chinese vision, we do respect the integrity of the territory. And I think Russia, what is doing now is actually triggering a problem, very sensitive problem, is that they have get voted these four regions, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and they wanted to and this they have already declared that this today is part of the Russia. But is this decision accepted all around the world? Is this recognized by the international world? Is another question. It's another issue. For Chinese part, China have always been respecting the territory of each country, and for now, the best thing is to secure the peace and to avoid a nuclear war, which would be a great disaster both for both countries and also for Russia and for Europe. So this is actually a very sensitive period for now, as we actually look closer to this issue with all these incidents that's happening in the Ukraine these days, these several days. I think that everybody is quite nervous now to look at the situation and to actually to see like where are we going to? Is this kind of uncertainty that makes people afraid of what's happening? And not only Ukrainian people, but also Russian people, but also like all the economy around the world. We saw lots of inflation these days. We saw the energy crisis. We saw that European countries are actually preparing the plans to reducing the energy consumption. So these are all the symptoms by saying that today we don't have any confidence. People are not confident anymore in their authority, in their country, and in the world economy.
Very nice. And Mr. Ivan Vershtuk, could you please tell us how do you see this narrative of the West trying to link the war in Ukraine mainly to Vladimir Putin, as though Russia doesn't have any problems with the West and Putin is the only problem?
Politically, the Russian Federation has done this huge reverse in its political course, because yet to 20 years ago, when Vladimir Putin became leader of Russia, it was a totally different country, which was deeply integrated into the Western markets, and they had all these great Russian, energy companies get listed on the London Stock Exchange, where investors would get all their shares and bonds, and they had trust in the Russian economy. But eventually, all the economic matters, all the capitalistic matters, all the cash flows and investments, they stopped making sense to Vladimir Putin. To him, as a person with a Soviet political mentality, what matters most is territories. So the bigger territory Russia has, this is like the mission, the political mission that Vladimir Putin sees for himself. Of course, this has some considerations. Russia, has a population of over 150 million people, and they need Ukrainian agriculture industry, because Ukraine has this high moisture soil, able to produce all kinds of agriculture goods. Necessary to feed growing population, especially in the Asian regions where the fertility rate is much higher. And of course, the West underestimated Vladimir Putin's change when it happened 8 years ago. To him, money stopped matter that much. The West still saw Putin as a kleptocrat, who cares about these luxurious houses and, expensive watches that he wears in his hand. But to him, being an empire and being a ruling power of Eastern Europe and also in Central Asia is much more important. The West made growing geopolitical ambitions in Vladimir Putin, and now this is changing. We see Joe Biden admitting mistakes of Barack Obama, who was shaking hands with Russian leaders. Now things are different. For West, this might be painful to admit that so many mistakes have been done for the past 10 years, but it's better to admit mistakes later than not admit them ever.
Very nice indeed.
Its own contribution into this.
Very nice. Mr. Abdenour Toumi is back with us. Mr. Abdenour Toumi, you may resume your answer. As we were talking about 3 important points. One is what helped the situation get here. Why did we get here in the first place? I mean, the fact of flirting with NATO in regards with the Ukraine, as well as to the pressing point of the consequences when we resort to, let's say, nuclear war, and the mistakes committed by the West when it comes to dealing with Russia as a country or Vladimir Putin as a person.
And good afternoon again, and sorry for this inconvenience. Yes, I mean, now, as I said, so the war has entered a new phase, and it is a shift. And now the entire, I would say, narrative of this war has changed. I mean, it started with President Putin's special forces invasion to Ukraine, and then there were some tactics, and of course, the first aim or main aim of his operation didn't work. So it was, I mean, he reset his, again, strategy. Now we are in a process, actually we can say it, we are in a process of, I would say, not explicit co-belligerent, but it is an implicit one, but one also can say it is a confrontation now between the US and Russia, and indeed the polar or the pillar of this confrontation has become personal between President Putin and President Joe Biden. Now, how this war will end, actually nobody knows, because as I said earlier, I mean, I'm afraid to go to the Orwellian scenario. I mean, as I said, the quickest way to end the war is to lose it. I mean, as George Orwell put it. The main question, does President Putin want to end it this way? Again, I don't think so. On the other hand, for the momentum that the Ukrainians are having, the Ukrainian resistance is having these days, and also we saw that, clearly that President Zelensky has ruled out any direct contact or talk with President Putin, so that President Putin did the same thing last week. So now we entered into this impasse, which leads to the continuation of this war. And this is how, actually, to some extent, how the, I won't say explicitly or directly NATO, but I will put the US, how they want this war to continue, because in the end of the day, as I said it earlier in this on this show, it is the continuation of the Cold War by any means.
And Mr. Abdul to me, how do you read the American influence amidst all this? Do you think it is a crumbling one or an ascending one? And why we didn't see, for example, this in Trump's administration? Do you think that the West now views the US as no longer a reliable partner?
Actually, they do. And this is, again, I said, it is personal. Don't forget President Biden, even though he is a Democrat, and we know, the Democrats have that kind of, I would say, a dove approach when it comes to war. But nonetheless, we know how they, they started the war, and even they jumped a nuclear bomb in Japan, 77 years ago. So now it is personal. And President Biden also, he is a well-experimented politician. He has been in the Congress for more than 50 years, and he was one of the hawkish congressmen and then senator in time of the Cold War. So this, as far as President, the former president, American former president Donald Trump, it was kind of, I would say, an unconventional president and unconventional politicians in a wharves of politicians in D.C. So this is very interesting element, which brings us to the character of President Zelensky now, how he's managing this war in time of Netflix, and also a kind of a mix. He became a hero for the Ukraine and for the West in terms of the, he succeeded to put this, narrative of, again, the age of Netflix and the new tools of communication that he masters very well, adding a dose of Greek drama into it. And this is why today the Americans are so happy to have such an unconventional character to push for the war, and because the aim of from the American perspective is to dislodge the Russia for a while. The unfinished job that was not finished during the Cold War, during the Cold War era, and then the dislocation of the Soviet Union in 1991. So it is a continuation of this war. It is one of the U.S. strategy, and also to have its full approach and a new, I would say, card reshuffling in Europe and vis-a-vis the NATO in Europe.
Very nice indeed. And Ms. Zhang Shanghui, you did earlier mention the issue of energy, and here we're speaking about Europe division when it comes to energy. How do you think that Europe can actually step up energy security amid the sabotage that we witnessed, for example, in the Nord Stream pipelines?
Yes, this is definitely a great question. And I would just wanted to add a little bit with what he said just before this. I would wish to say that we were talking about energy issue. We were talking about economical issue, but everything is actually related together. And when you look at the role of the United States today, when facing with the energy issue that you were talking about, when we faced with the Ukraine and Russian war that we were talking about, we can find that the U.S. are always there trying to have its best position, the best position ever to gain benefits from the disorder from the world that they participated in creating. Why? Because like the first thing is that when there's a war in the Europe, it's a chance for the US to send weapons, to sell weapons to the countries like involved inside. And the second one is that this actually created an energy problem in the Europe. And when we talk about energy problem in the Europe, these is two things. The first thing is that the energy, how people are going to heat themselves, how people are going to get themselves heated during this winter period. The second thing is that when the energy price goes up, everything becomes very expensive than before. And the third one is that when this is the case, the US will take the advantage of the situation and send more their gas, send more their petrol, send more their fossil energy to Europe, to the continents who are in need of these kind of resources.
And here we see the US, of course, taking advantage instead of actually solving the problem. And here, Mrs. Jen, another key question is what today's energy crisis means for fossil fuel investment if we are still to achieve our collective climate goals. Say, are today's sky-high fossil fuel prices a signal to invest in additional supply, or perhaps a further reason to invest in alternatives? What do you think?
It is actually, today we can see that the energy giants turn to fossil fuels like coal as Europe embraces for winter. So we can see that today all these fossil fuels, their price in the market are actually going very, very high. And in order to ensure the security of the electricity supply, for example, the Danish authorities have asked to resume to use more oil and coal-fired power stations. So it seems that we're actually retreating. It seems that we're not making any progress now with what's happening today, that more European countries are going back with the fossil energy uses, and which is doing no good to the nature, doing no good to our plan for the EU plan for 2030, for the plan, the COP, the COP 15. These kind of fixing, we can't do it. But on the same time, that we can see that, for example, when we are having the epidemic of 19 of the COVID, we can see that in that period, the global environments are getting better. So I would say again, this issue is that when we want to find a solution, we need to go back to the nature. When we want to find a solution to reduce, to improve the natural environment, to boost the economy, to find other diversifications of energy sources. I mean, these are all those challenges, but the key point is that we need to go back. We need to go back to in the nature and to find more solutions, but not only get dependent on one energy. It is time for European countries, it is time for the whole world to develop other clean energies as quickly as possible. If we had did that like 10 years before, 10 years ago. So today, I don't think that the EU members are that dependent, are that passive in this situation.
Very nice indeed. And let me give the final question to Mr. Ivan Fakhstuk. As experts are saying that we must not lose sight of the fact that lasting solutions to today's crisis lie in reducing demand via the rapid deployment of renewables, like Jen was saying, energy efficiency and other low emissions technologies, as highlighted in the IEA's recent 10-point plan to reduce the European Union's reliance on Russian natural gas. This includes making the most of nuclear power in countries around the world that see a role for it, let's say, in their energy mix. But is this really going to solve the energy crisis in Europe in general, according to you, Mr. Ivan?
I think the European Union will have to move to this new stage of its energy markets, where the nuclear energy will have to have, another this important historical mission to provide electricity to European consumers. Now we see France is reforming its nuclear energy, doing all the repairs, and also the United Kingdom is building these smaller nuclear plants. which are secure, which are digitally controlled, and have all the safety measures that are needed. I think there is no other big alternative to using the nuclear energy. I know the major concern. For the past 40 years, we had these two big nuclear disasters, one in Ukraine in 1986 and another one in Japan in 2011. But come on, what happened in Ukraine back then? It was caused by the lack of any technology, because the Soviet Union was not a technological country. Technology was not there to prevent the disaster. And what happened in Japan was a result of the earthquake and not of the failure of the nuclear plant itself.
Very nice. Very nice, Mr. Ivan Feshtuk. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I would have loved to continue with you and all our panelists, Mr. Abdunor Toumi, Mrs. Jen Shankwi, and Ivan Feshtuk. Thank you so much for agreeing to be with us today in our special. Unfortunately, it comes to an end now. Thank you for watching, dear viewers. For more stories, you can tune in to our social media platforms. Bye for now.